talked about this. And I told you I was going to come back and ask you a question next week, and somebody reminded me that we were doing something else the next week. And then we were doing something else the week after that, and then we were doing something else the week after that. Does anybody remember what the question was? Chelsea, I figured, Chelsea, I could count on you and Natalie. So, okay, remind people of the question.
So, I think it was a seminary student from another nationality.
Actually, we had a campus in another country that had been a communist country. Yeah. So go ahead with the story.
And they were not being paid well by their jobs. They didn't have enough to live on, so they would sort of pilfer items or things that they could use for their church.
Yeah.
And the question was whether that was right and what would be the advice to give.
And their argument would be, and they said this explicitly, their argument was, you have to live from your job. And so if your job's not paying you enough to live, you are justified in expropriating whatever you need to live. Let me ask you to do a bit of moral theologizing now. How do you respond to that perspective?
Stealing.
Excuse me?
Stealing is stealing.
Stealing is stealing.
But when Jesus and the disciples were hungry on the Sabbath, they took grain from a farmer's field in handfuls and ate it. So was that stealing?
Actually, that's a situation that is covered in the law itself. I think I've mentioned that after we're done with this series, actually on Sunday mornings, after we're done with our trip through the Bible, I'd like to do a little bit of talking about our relationship to money and our relationship to giving. And one of the things that comes up in the Old Testament, we talk about tithing. But in the Old Testament, it wasn't just a matter of giving a tithe. There were actually two separate tithes that Old Testament Israelites were obligated to give, and then another third tithe that they gave every 3 years. So you can figure 23 and 3300% of an average Israelite's increase went into tithing. Now, part of that was consumed by the family itself. But then in addition to that, there was other required giving. And part of it is what Lloyd is referencing here, the business of gleaning. If you were a farmer and you had a field, you weren't permitted to harvest the corners of your field. You had to leave that stand, and the poor could come in and they could harvest that. And if you were walking past a field, or you were walking past a vineyard, or through a field or vineyard, you were permitted to take enough to feed yourself as you were on the way through. Now, you couldn't just sit down there and, help yourself to everything. But if you plucked some grapes on the way through and ate them on the way through, or some grain, this is probably what Jesus' disciples were doing. As they walked through the field, they would pull off a few heads of grain. They would, do this to separate the wheat from the chaff, and then blow on it, and then just eat the grain. Okay, that was actually permitted by the law, and it wasn't considered stealing. Any other perspectives?
I just had a couple thoughts. Generally, we know it's never right to do wrong for right to come about.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit more specifically, different scenario, but in the New Testament, we know it was wrong for the tax collectors to collect more than what they were told to collect.
Okay. I actually think that in this case, there's a complicating factor that's involved. I agree with the general principle that you've articulated. Stealing is stealing. But when we make the statement, thou shalt not steal, what does that assume about property?
It's held privately, and so that someone else has.
There's ownership.
You have a right to ownership.
That people actually own stuff, and they have a right to what they own. Now, Romania, during the time that this stuff was taking place, was a communist system. Who owns stuff under communism?
The
The state does. The government does. And it's not like you can go out and get a private job somewhere else. And it's not like you can actually manufacture something, make something, grow something, and sell it on your own. Because when you make something or when you grow something, the government already owns that. So I think what we're looking at is one of the complications that's created actually by an unjust system. In other words, if you start to mess around with the institution of private property, if you eliminate private property to begin with, and only one entity, the government, really owns the means of production and the property, and the government deliberately intends to starve its people, then I think that gets into a very complicated situation, and the problem is created by the government itself under those circumstances. So I'm not saying one way or the other whether they should have done what they are doing. What I'm saying is that there are implications to this commandment. Thou shalt not steal implies, and there are plenty of other scriptures that imply the right to private property. That's a right that the government had actually removed. So if you are now told that you have no right to property, and that's the law, are you obligated to live by that unjust law? It's kind of like being told you have no right to defend yourself and you will surrender the means of defending yourself. Is that a law that you're obligated to obey? I'm not going to pursue that any further. I take that as an endorsement. If it had been like, nah. Or worse yet, if Siri had said, I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Which is what I had happen to me when I was lecturing at Maranatha. Take a look at Deuteronomy, I think I've got the right text here, Deuteronomy 22, in connection with this topic. And I want you to tell me whether you think this text legitimately falls under the overarching umbrella of the eighth commandment. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt in any case bring them again unto thy brother, and if thy brother be not nigh unto thee, or if thou know him not, then thou shalt bring it unto thine own house, and it shall be with thee until thy brothers seek after it, and thou shalt restore it to him again. In like manner shalt thou do with his ass, and so shalt thou do with his raiment, and with all lost things of thy brothers which he hath lost, and thou hast found, shalt thou do likewise. Thou mayest not hide thyself. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again. There's a parallel passage in Leviticus that talks not only about doing this for your brother, that is to say your relative, but talks about doing this even for your enemy. So if you fail to do what these passages teach, if you fail to protect your brother's property, if his cow gets out of the pasture and comes wandering over to your place, and you decide you're not going to return it to him, you're going to take it to the auction and sell it, is that a violation of the 8th commandment? Should we ask a lawyer?
I thought you were going one way and then you switched, but you made it easy at the end, because if you take it and then you go sell it, then you're obviously converting it for yourself.
For your
in that
use.
form. Where I thought you were going is if you just leave it there,
Shoot it off.
or you just, oh, okay, it's there, I'm too busy, and I go on with my thing. Then you're violating the principle of that passage. I don't think you're stealing it, though.
Go ahead, John.
Could we say that not making a good faith effort to watch it for your brother and return it if he presents himself as, could we say that stealing by omission, by virtue of not making a good faith effort to, if you're keeping it for your brother and everybody knows that's not what you mean, could that be stealing by omission? You're not actively taking it, but you're sure not making any kind of an effort to return it.
So your brother is suffering loss because of what under this passage would be, I think, understood as your negligence.
Yeah.
So if someone suffers loss because of my negligence, is that stealing? We're getting some intramural debate.
But if you sell it, that's not yours.
Selling it is, I think Brent made the point, that's a different matter.
But verse 2 talks about, if you don't know who he is, you do not know him. How does that factor in? Because if I don't know who this belongs to, I can't return it, honestly.
Well, it says that if you don't know, then what you do is you keep it there and take care of it until he comes to claim it.
Which, by the way, is the origin of finders keepers.
Yeah, which doesn't mean finders owners.
Right, but the original idea, so I understand, was when they did this in English common law, was precisely this scripture. For this reason, because the person who finds it is the natural place to hold it for a period of time.
Jerry.
Well, where does that leave you? Like, say you find something on the road. Are you gonna leave it there, or can you take it home and keep it?
Like a big bag of cocaine or something?
Well, I'm thinking like farmers lose log chains and they lose bales of hay and different things like that. So are you gonna leave it there, or are you gonna pick it up and bring it home and then wait till they figure out you got it?
Well, actually, there is an intermediate step, and I have done this. You can use a local paper or a local website to let people know I've found something that was lost, or you even specify what was lost, and if you're willing to get, come and identify it or tell me about it so I can identify. So I know it's yours, then I'll return it to you. There are things you can do. In fact, I've still got a cap in my closet for I don't remember, one or another airborne division that I just found by the street, brand new cap. And I've put that in the paper several times, different websites, several times, just to say, if you lost a cap somewhere around this location, tell me what's on the cap and I'll give it to you. And no takers yet. It still sits in my closet. And I'm not going to wear it because it represents a unit I never served with. So, yeah, and I think it's fair to say there are circumstances under which it may be very difficult to restore property. Having said that, Let me give you another example. I'm at a church meeting. This goes back 30 years now. This goes back to 1990. That's more than 30 years. I'm at a church meeting, not my church. It's a bunch of preachers meeting in a distant city. And we're walking down the street to the church, and here we start to see money laying here and there, bills laying here and there. And we're walking along, and we're starting to pick up money here and here and here and here. And you know, we're all preachers, and we're looking at each other, and we're going, whose is this? Where did it come from? How are we ever going to find out? And we ended up with some hundreds of dollars that we picked up. Finally, a part of it was just up on the lawn of the church, or just outside the church. Turns out that what had happened was that the treasurer of the church was taking the Sunday giving to put it into the bank, and forgot that the bag was open, and everything came out and was just scattered around the street. And I think we managed to get all but about $20 of it back for it. Yeah, which is amazing. But I will say, I think that's something we were obligated to do. And if we hadn't returned it, I think we would have been in violation of the 8th commandment. Particularly when we found out where it came from. If we hadn't been able to find out where it came from, then your options at that point are limited. Look at verse 5. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. Okay, now, some of you may have grown up in contexts in churches where you heard blistering sermons about how women should never put pants on. That is not what this passage is teaching. In fact, the word for man here isn't the word for a male. The word for man here is geber, which means
A mighty man or a hero.
yeah, a mighty man, a soldier kind of guy. So your mother shouldn't wear combat boots. That's the idea.
There's a style now.
I know. But in spite of the fact that we don't want to see this text misapplied, and by the way, you'll see Debbie in slacks sometimes. She won't typically work at church, but you'll see her in slacks. She cleans the house that way, you know. She cleans up me that way. But the verse has got to mean something, right? And at minimum, I think what it means is that we are supposed to dress in ways that are not gender ambiguous. In other words, when people look at you, they should be able to tell whether you're a guy or whether you're a gal. But it's interesting to me that the verse occurs exactly in this context. And by the way, this is becoming like a big issue again, isn't it? My son-in-law and I were in a store together the other day. And here comes this guy walking toward us, and he's got a beard, and he's wearing a cap that lets us know he served on a particular ship in the Navy, and he's in a skirt, mini skirt, and heels. Okay. delete.
There's one around Cambridge like that too.
Yeah, and you're going to see that kind of thing. Okay, now it would be easy to say what's at stake here is a violation of the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. But I'm wondering if there isn't also an application of the commandment, particularly in view of where it falls here, of the commandment, thou shalt not steal. steal. When you steal something, you're taking away from somebody else something that they have no right, something that you have no right to remove. It seems to me that a guy who does that is actually taking some measure of dignity away from women, some measure of privilege away from women, that women actually have a right to. And interestingly enough, even hardcore feminists are saying that kind of thing right now. They're looking at people who are doing that. At you know, the guy who says, I'm a girl, and gets in the swimming pool and competes on the swim team, or gets in the boxing ring and just knocks the stuffing out of some woman there. Feminists are saying, no, this is robbery. They are taking something to which they have no right. And I actually think there is a legitimate case to be made there. That this is not only a violation of the commandment that thou shalt not bear false witness, but it's actually a violation of the commandment, thou shalt not steal. You are taking the appearance, they are taking the appearance, and attempting to take the privileges of someone to which they have no right. Well, I'm going to leave this here for now. Maybe that's giving you something to think about yet this evening. We may take a little more time on this commandment, or we may go on to the 9th commandment next week. In between, if you've got specific questions over the 8th commandment, by all means, bring them up with me over the next week or so, and we can potentially discuss those.
Well, I've been thinking, because what you brought up, the scenario that you brought up, is that these poor people in Romania, because their government was so corrupt, couldn't feed themselves.
Yeah, literally.
Well, you know, when I had my own place and I was growing corn and all kinds of stuff and hay and everything, I caught a lady in my cornfield pulling corn off the stalks, eating field corn. And I thought to myself, I asked her if she could barely speak English.
You got to be hungry to do that.
Oh, yeah. And so I had a friend, his name's Peter, and I found out where she lived, and I took him with me, and we went over there and we talked to her. And I told her, if you're going to eat corn, go over there, because that's where I planted the sweet corn. Get as much
If you
as
go over there, that's the neighbors.
No, it was the part of the field that
Better corn.
I planted 2 acres of sweet corn for anybody that wanted it. I didn't care who they were. But my thought is, the people in Romania, they couldn't all be starving, shouldn't they be looking after each other?
That actually they did, very seriously. That's one of the things that was very impressive about that culture, and I think about any culture that's been under communism. These are people who know how to share. You know, they do look out for each other, and they were at that time. Now, one more thing comes to mind. You get somebody who goes down to the Army-Navy store and buys a uniform and a bunch of medals and starts wearing it around. What do we call that?
Stolen valor.
Stolen valor. Think that's legitimately a violation?
Yeah,
I think it is.
absolutely.
I think it is. Well, anyway, let's go to prayer time. Let's talk about your prayer requests. Paul and Bertha.